Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my Week 8 LEC overview, analysis, and no power rankings at the end. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the series by now if you had been watching my channel. It's been a little while since we've done a weekly recap, pretty much the beginning of the week, which feels kind of crazy. It's been quite a few days. That's because we are in the midst of playoff season, and I know the LEC concluded a little while ago, and this video is coming out significantly later than it usually would, but we've had so much content going up this week. Not only have all three playoff primers gone up for the other three major regions, the LCS, the LCK, and the LPL, all of those are up on the channel right now, but we've already started our playoff coverage. LPL round 1 and 2, we've already covered both of those on the channel, and LCK round 1 is up on the channel. So unfortunately, because LEC starts quite a bit later in terms of playoffs than pretty much anybody else, we've got a bit more time to cover them. That means today, they get a video all to themselves, the Week 8 LEC recap, to talk about the 3 days that we got here in Week 8 to solidify playoffs. If you guys are excited, let me know down in the comment section below. There were a lot of good games this week, obviously a lot that had a lot of implications for playoffs, so definitely a lot of interesting things happening. But let's go ahead and not waste too much more time. Let's jump right into our first series of day 1. And that was a series between Team BDS and Misfits Gaming. Misfits picks up the win here. Obviously, they had already locked themselves for playoffs last week. But a pretty big win here puts themselves in a really good position to get potentially one of the top 2, even top 1 seeds, possibly, in the LEC. It's so wide open right now. It's pretty incredible. But Misfits does a really good job. They dominate BDS in this game as expected. Quite frankly, BDS obviously not the best team in the world, and Misfits really overperforming and showing up a lot this year. So let's talk about who performed well on Misfits. This jungle mid duo honestly has really been a positive for Misfits over the last few weeks. Ever since Zanzora came in for Schlatan, I feel like this team has been fully unlocked. This team has certainly, in my opinion, gotten better with Zanzora in there. He just becomes such an issue. You do triple ban him. You ban the Trundle, you ban the Poppy, but then you kind of give up. You ban the Vi and the Jarvan. No Skarner ban. He gets put on one of his most competent and most played picks in the LEC, and he does super duper well on the Skarner, is able to assist VTO super well on the Sylas. We always know that VTO loves to play those aggressive, you know, I don't want to say assassin, but basically Sylas is an assassin kind of pick, right? That can affect the map, that can be versatile, that can go anywhere he wants, or take the resources himself. It is a playstyle that I think Misfits really loves to go to, and VTO obviously popped off on it in this game. He's going to get my player of the game here. He was just really good on the Sylas in the early game. He was really good in the late game. Not that it was all that important after a certain amount of time, because Skarner was just a free pull and a free kill, and then Sivir got online, and you had Braum Shields, you had the Sejuani, who had a ton of gold in the top lane. Irrelevant, I thought, played really, really well into aggressive in this game. Overall, Misfits was just a really good team this week, and in this game, like, it just wasn't all that close. Misfits was really, really strong. As for BDS, not a great loss. Obviously, it doesn't matter for them. They are completely and utterly eliminated from playoffs. They are one of the few teams that it just has absolutely no chance of making it in. Actually, I think they might be the only team that has no chance of making it in, so you know, it doesn't really matter what happens this week. Really, they're just trying to finish out the season in not too of an embarrassing fashion. Maybe play spoiler to some other teams, but they just got completely outplayed here. Whether it was Aggressivu in the top lane losing the tank matchup hard, whether it was Syncroft in the jungle not having any jungle pressure on an early game important jungler like Xin Zhao, Xmatty and Limit not scaling at all as Twitch and Tom Kench, or Nuclear Ant making Ahri look completely balanced in the mid lane by doing no damage and not making any macro plays. BDS is just not a good team, and we know it. Everyone knows it, so it's not really that big of a shock to see them, I would say, fumble the bag so hard like they did in this game. Nuclear Ant is going to get my dud of the game, because at least I think in Aggressivu's case, like, he was playing Ornn, and sometimes you die, or sometimes you just lose lane as Xmatty into Neon, like, it's going to happen, but Nuclear, like, really made Ahri look balanced. He was involved in pretty much nothing this entire game, and that to me is more damning than at least dying a lot, because at least when you're dying a lot, you're trying to make plays, but it really just felt like Nuclear Ant was nowhere near the action. He had a couple of good games a couple of weeks ago, but, you know, I think for the most part, this split, he's just been pretty disappointing, and you could say that for most of BDS. Obviously, we already know that Nobody on this team has really looked good at all this split, but it's just being compounded more and more in the recent weeks. So outlook-wise, BDS is in 10th. I really don't feel like I need to talk about them. For Misfits, obviously the opportunity for them to get first is absolutely still there. If they can win out this week, they're actually in a really good spot to get the number 1 seed, which would actually be unbelievable. Obviously, it's not going to be an easy path. Mad Lions does have to play along a tad bit. And also, you know, this week isn't easy for you. Yes, you had the BDS game to the end day 1, but in day 2, you've got G2. Day 3, you've got Fnatic. So definitely not the most easy schedule for Misfits, but they put themselves in a great position to overperform what me and I think a lot of other people expected from this team for a majority of the year. BTO's a beast. Zanzro's made the team better. Irrelevant's been a huge surprise. Neon and Mersa have worked super well together, especially in the back half of the season. This is a team that could actually make some damage in playoffs, and it's really, really fun to see. Moving on to game 2 here of day 1 now. We had an interesting matchup, certainly something interesting here, between Team Vitality and SK Gaming. And SK picks up a huge win here to start off Super Week in a close game that just isn't able to go Vitality's way. I gotta give a lot of credit to SK. They played the back half of this game super duper well, and you gotta give them credit for that. The player I want to give the most credit for, obviously we're going to talk about draft in a bit, but I got to give credit to Treats. Those engages on the Rakan were genuinely phenomenal and really made it difficult for Vitality to win any 5v5. Those flanks, genius. Really, I mean, when you're playing a 5v4, it makes the game a lot easier, and it really felt like it was a 5v4 in pretty much every single team fight, what with Treats being able to catch Carzzy out so consistently here on the Rakan. A great game from him. We got to talk about the draft just a little bit, though. This is one of the most fun drafts I've seen in quite a while. It's super risky, because if this doesn't work, it's going to look bad. Like, you're going to lose very badly, but luckily, they made it work. You've got the Darius top lane, you've got the Vi in the jungle, the LeBlanc in the mid lane, the Yasuo AD carry, the Rakan in support. There's so many things that can go wrong here overall. And it's so one-track aggressive, like you have to play fast and forward, that things can go very bad if the game state is just not in your favor at the time. But things worked out really well. Jezu played the Yasuo very well in this game. Treats was setting him up for a lot of different opportunities, and honestly, Jezu capitalized on that. I wasn't exactly sold on his Yasuo being ridiculously clean, but he came out today and he proved me wrong. He was very, very good in this game. And then Gen X in the top lane on the Darius. That is such a fun pick. Obviously, we're not really seeing it in pro, but we've seen it a couple times in a few different regions, minor regions mostly. It can be pulled off. It can be a strong pick. There's a lot of things that Darius does well in the meta that can be done at a high level, and I think we saw a little bit of that today. Yes, he's not the most dominant of late game, team fighters, but I think he can fill a kind of similar role to what someone like Aatrox can fill, in the sense of he can just be a nuisance as an engaged threat on the enemy team and cause a lot of problems and disruption early in the fights to create space for the backline. There was no backline in this game, but, if there was, I can see why a Darius pick would be good. You have Vi going in with him to completely complete the burst combo. LeBlanc there, Certus's golden pick here. Like, everything here for SK, it just feels very much like a their team draft. And I like those. Everybody knows that I've been preaching this for months. If you're going to, pick some off-meta stuff, as long as you're good at it, like, go ahead. Like, play what you're good at. It's going to work if you're good enough at it, because you're probably going to be better playing it than people are playing against it. So always go for it if you really think that it's going to, be a positive for you. It's just kind of crazy that they do this with their playoff chances on the line. As for Vitality, tough loss here. I don't actually think they played that garbage. I definitely think they were in this game. They just couldn't come away with the victory in the end. Treats was just kind of outplaying them towards the back half here. He was the best player in the game. He's player of the game, by the way. Don't think I need to explain that. If you watch the game, you probably got that. But Vitality just wasn't all that great. My dud of the game has to go to Carzzy here. And honestly, I don't entirely blame Carzzy. I don't think it's, like, solely his fault. I think doing 0 damage in a late game team fight is going to win you dud of the game, especially when it's pretty consistently 0 damage. But for him to get picked off so consistently, like, you have so much peel on this team. It's almost not even his fault at that point. Even if he is relatively overextended, why is the Galio not there? Why is the Jarvan not there? Why is the Ornn not there? Like, where are they? Like, they can peel for this. They can stop this from happening, and they just didn't do it. So overall, I just think Vitality did a really poor job in the back half of these games. And, you get to the point where Sivir's like your main damage dealer in these team fights because you're running 3 tanks and then an assassin like an Ahri who's just not going to be able to carry a team fight, especially against a full engaged kind of beefy comp here in SK Gaming. I just don't see how you're going to win this if you don't just peel for Carzzy, but they didn't do it. They didn't peel for Carzzy at all. Obviously, he was overextended and got caught at multiple points too. It really just was a bad game overall for Vitality. Even if it wasn't early, it definitely was late, and there were a lot of things that I think they need to clean up. Outlook-wise for these two teams, not a great win or a great loss for Vitality. Like, this is a tough week for them. They've got a lot of games that I don't think are all that easy. They have to play Fnatic tomorrow. They have to play Rogue on day 3. Those aren't particularly easy games. Both teams, especially Fnatic, fighting for their playoff lives. Vitality could very well have a rough week here ahead of them, and this was probably their easiest game and not a great way to start it. As for SK, big win here. It keeps their playoff hopes alive. They would have been out with this loss, but instead they're sitting here. They're 7-9, sitting in a position where they can still make playoffs. A lot would have to go right. Both Excel and Fnatic would have to, and Astralis would all have to basically shit the bed over the course of the next week, so it's not the most likely thing in the world, but it technically is still possible with the win here, and you know, SK is going to keep living on the dream, and if they're going to pull out fun drafts like this, I hope they keep pushing forward. Moving on to our third game here of day 1, another game with some heavy playoff implications. Obviously, in the LEC, we're going to get a lot of those because pretty much nobody's eliminated from playoff contention yet. I'm talking about Rogue versus Excel. Pretty big game here that Rogue is able to take. Excel, obviously, on a pretty massive losing streak. They've pretty much played their way out of playoff contention over the last few weeks, and this game kind of continues the trend at least a little bit. Rogue kind of finding their form again. They went through a little bit of a dip a couple of weeks ago. Over the past couple of weeks, they've just been, you know, kind of getting back to where they were. Back to the good drafts, back to playing around where they want to play around, which is mostly jungle and bot lane, and just kind of figuring it out from there. I don't love this draft. I actually don't really particularly like this draft, especially for Rogue, but I think they're able to pull it off here. Bot lane's just so good for them. Comp and Trimby have been such a positive for them over the course of the year that it's really difficult even when you draft some picks that I don't think... You draft some solo lanes that I don't think are all that good, especially for this Rogue team. You know, obviously the Renekton is a pick that I think can work, but isn't all that useful. And then the Taliyah pick, I think overall is a great pick, but Larson has shown to not be a very good Taliyah. And honestly, there were points in this game where he definitely backed that up. But Comp and Trimby were always there to continue playing really well here. Malrang on the Jarvan, I think, also was really good. But for me, player of the game is going to go to Comp in the bot lane on the Sivir. Not only was he good in the early game, he really dominated this laning phase against the Draven, which is honestly super difficult to do with the help of Malrang, quite honestly. But Trimby did a great job in that matchup as well. And then eventually it got to the point where Mickey was just hoping for miracle plays, I guess, and just running it, basically. And the game was over for Excel. Sivir was out of control. No one on that team has any way to stop Sivir once she gets rolling. So Comp played really well. Like I said, Trimby was really good. His engages were great. Significantly better than Mickey's and made Patrick's life very difficult. I actually think the Rakan into Draven matchup can be very Rakan favored. As long as, you know, the Draven's not two-shotting you. I think that can be pretty good. So as long as you play from even, I think Rakan can do a lot to upset Draven because you can kind of have an idea of where to throw out your W, at least in a range to hit that knockup, because he's telegraphed. So, pretty good there. And then, outside of that, like I said, Larson had some moments. Odo played well in this game. Odo was fine on the Renekton. I think that's a pick that you can do well on. He wasn't all that impactful towards the outcome of the game, but he looked fine on the Renekton. Larson definitely made some oopsies in the early game, but came back and he was fine. As for Excel, I'm starting to get worried. Like, definitely starting to get worried that this team isn't going to make playoffs, and that would be an absolute disaster for this organization and for this roster, who at many points in time were sitting in the top 2 of the LEC this split. This is not a great loss. It is to an okay team, but they didn't look all that competitive against them, quite frankly, especially this bottom lane, which is kind of the part of the team that I was the most excited about, and the reason that I thought Excel was a top 2 or 3 team was Patrick and Mickey. Really felt like they had a good synergy, but man, some switch flipped for Mickey. And at some point, he was just like, I'm now the worst support in the league, because he has been for like 4 weeks, and it's not good. That's not a good sign. He's going to get my dead of the game again here. He made so many questionable decisions here on the Nautilus. I get that, like, your score's gonna get inflated when you're playing an engaged champion and you're losing because, you know, you're just not gonna, like, those plays aren't gonna go nearly as well for you, but man, some of these engages were just, like, terrible. Like, actually terrible. The film backs up that Mickey was clearly the worst player in this game, and it wasn't really all that close, and he kind of has been for Excel for a considerable amount of time. I think him and Finn have certainly been switching back and forth on the crown for who's running it the most on Excel, but Mickey, I think, has held it for the majority of the season. Patrick, I didn't think played all that well, although, like I said, if you're not ahead, if you're not able to actively kill the Rakan quickly, that matchup can be pretty difficult for the Draven. And then Finn, I thought played, I mean, he's nothing in the top lane. Marcoon was completely out-jungled here by Malrang. Like I said, the bot lane just got so out of control because of the jungle influence that Marcoon really had nothing to do on the Vi. Want to give a little bit of a shout-out to Nukeduck, who I actually think was kind of okay in this game. Definitely punished Larson for some of his missteps on the Talia, but it just got to the point where, like, Rogue was so out of control. Like, what is the Sylas going to do to stop that? Overall, not a good game from Excel, but it's the people who have been underperforming that have continued to underperform in a matchup that, quite frankly, they really needed to win. Outlook-wise, Excel's in a really tough spot. They're sitting at 7-9. That's the same record as SK Gaming. Like, that's not a good spot to be in. If they're not careful, like, they're just simply not going to be in contention for the top 6 seeds. They're basically going to have to win out to even give themselves a shot, and other things are also still going to have to go right for them. So, a lot of not good here coming out from Excel. They no longer control their own destiny, but at best, they have to win out. So, no more losses. It's not even possible to make it if they lose a single more game. As for Rogue, good win. Like, you're going to be excited about this. You've looked a lot better in recent weeks, even if it wasn't perfect. Like I said, Larson certainly had his ups and downs in the game. I think overall the team was good. Most certainly the bot lane. Jungle Malrang, I think, did a really good job against a good jungler in Marcoon, even if Excel is just kind of off the rocker right now, like not firing on all cylinders. But overall, a good win for Rogue, and they're certainly going to be happy with that moving into the last few days. Moving on to our fourth game here of day one. We had a matchup between two 7 and 8 teams that are trying to put themselves in a good position. Fnatic taking on Astralis, and Fnatic picks up a super important win here, putting themselves probably in the best position of a lot of those teams that were sitting outside of the playoffs, or at least at the 7 and 8 mark going into this week, that being Astralis, Excel, even SK in that same sense. They move up to 8 and 8, move up to 500, put themselves in a much better spot to at least have a shot at controlling their own destiny, which is really good. Like, you know, obviously this win isn't guaranteed. Astralis has not been a bad team all year long, but Fnatic showed up today, and they played well. Obviously, shout out to Humanoid. He got ganked at level 3, and he did not die. I mean, that's huge. That's huge for this team. Not only do they often win when Humanoid doesn't run it early, but it gives Humanoid a lot of opportunity to be more aggressive when he feels like he can win the game. So, overall, that's a dub. Razork did die in that exchange, but it honestly didn't matter. He's playing Poppy, and once Poppy gets going, especially against this team comp, like, because look at this team comp, like, Poppy's gonna be a problem. They last pick Rakan into Poppy, and it's like, I don't really know what that is. Want to give a big shout out to Razork. He played it super duper well. Not only did he control the entire map over Xerxes, which he almost never should in the Poppy Trundle matchup. I think that's mostly Trundle favored. Poppy can obviously have some agency there, but your team kind of has to be ahead. But in the late game, like, this Poppy was super invaluable. They don't win the late game team fights nearly as easily without that Poppy W, because truly it shuts down everything that Astralis wants to do. Rakan tries to engage with anything, like, oops, nope. Poppy W says, not happening. So, kind of insane, overall, just how much of an impact this jungle had on the game as a whole, but Razork definitely deserves player of the game. Without him, I really don't think they have nearly as easy of a time winning this. Want to give a huge shout out to Wonder in the top lane as well, who did a great job of basically zoning out all of the other members of Astralis, whether that be Zeri, whether that be Karma, whether that be Trundle. Wonder was just kind of on the front line, completely invulnerable, and couldn't be touched. So, not the most fun game to play if you're Astralis, to have to be shut down when you try to engage by a Poppy, and then just kind of have to stare at a Gwen that you can't actually do damage to while Lucian just callings you from beyond from the back of the team fight. It's like, oh, well, oops. So, yeah, Fnatic did a really good job in draft, and I think they executed on it really well. Razork and Wonder did a great job. Upset and Hilly did a good job, I think, of making plays as well. Big clutch exhaust coming out from Upset in that final team fight. This Kennen could have been a huge problem on Chachi's Kennen, but Upset, very, very clutch exhaust to be able to stop all the damage really coming out from the Kennen ult, and really there was no one on the team to follow up because, like I said, Wunder was kind of zoning all of them. So really, really good play by Upset. It's an obvious play. Obviously, you bring Exhaust against a Kennen, but at the same time, you still got to make the play, and he made it, and it was a big play. It very much changed the outcome of how that team fight could have gone. But overall, good game for Fnatic. It was a little bit close, but they were the better team here by a considerable amount. Even if Razork wasn't the most dominant in the mid game, I thought his late game antics really deserved him player of the game, and Upset and Hilly did a good job of being the backline presence that Fnatic needed in that team fight. As for Astralis, not a bad game, not the worst game. It is a loss, which is super unfortunate, putting you at 7-9. That's where Excel is, that's where SK is. Definitely still in a spot where it is possible to control your own destiny. Well, it is possible for you to make playoffs as long as you win out. It's not possible for you to quote-unquote control your own destiny because some things would have to go right, like Vitality has to go 0-3 or some other shenanigans, right? But for Astralis, like, at least they've showed up this year. They've already outperformed, I think, what a lot of people expected, but unfortunately, just wasn't the perfect game for them. Done of the game is going to go to Jonghoon at support. Jonghoon's someone who I've been super high on. I've claimed that he's been the best support in the region this split, and I think that, you know, that has tracked, I think, for a considerable amount. Unfortunately, picking Rakan into Poppy and hoping the late game team fights go well is just not a recipe for a good game, and he just really wasn't able to accomplish anything today, and it's not entirely his fault. Like I said, sometimes champions just get, you know, counterplayed, but counterpicked, but I mean, at some point you gotta know, like, you're picking the Rakan into the Poppy, you have to try and do something, and he was, quite frankly, useless in this game on the Rakan. Not a good pick for him at all, and a very easy choice for dead of the game. Also, Kabe didn't really do anything in this game on the Zeri. I know we can talk about how the Zeri pick is really strong, and you can play it into the Lucian, and look at how many pentakills it's gotten, but, like, there are times where it just does nothing if you're not the better player, and this was one of those times. Kabe's not as good as Upset. Upset was able to get, you know, an advantage, and wasn't able, you know, Kabe wasn't able to get around Wunder. He just wasn't able to do anything there, and so the Zeri was completely useless in this game. Even if Chachi was doing a ton in the late game here on the Kennen, none of it really mattered. You have the Karma to try and enable the Zeri, you have the Trundle to try and enable the Zeri, but if she can't get in these team fights and actively do a ton of damage, like, she really is going to be useless, and this team comp completely falls apart. So, unfortunately for Astralis, that seemed to be the reality. As for the outlook of these two teams, like I said, Astralis is still in it. They don't control their own destiny. Some things are going to have to go right, but they have to win out. They put themselves now in a position where if they don't win every single game they have left, it's doomed for them, which is definitely interesting because in day 3, I know they play Excel. So only one of those teams can win out, and only one of those teams is going to be in a playoff position. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what that is. But for Fnatic, this is exactly the position you wanted to put yourself in. Getting a win early here puts yourself in a much better spot to get that 6th seed. Obviously, it's pretty up for grabs just in general. The 6th seed, they have it right now. At 8-8, they're the only team that was sitting in this kind of position that won outside of SK, who just kind of got into the conversation. So Fnatic now does control their own destiny. If they win out, they're guaranteed playoffs, and that's got to be a pretty exciting feeling for them. And obviously, honestly, like, their schedule doesn't get easier, so winning out isn't guaranteed. They've got Vitality tomorrow. They've got Misfits the day after. 2 really good teams that they're going to have to beat, but at this point, you know, as long as they can show up like they did today, it's going to be a good time for them. Moving on to Game 5 here, the final game of Day 1 action here of LEC Week 8. We had a top-of-the-table clash, a very interesting one between Mad Lions and G2 Esports. G2 picking up a huge win here to put themselves actually in a really, really solid position. Not only are they sitting at 10-6, but now they're also sitting for joint first place with Mad after being able to beat them in what was a pretty convincing win. Not the most confident one of all time. Certainly some good plays made by Mad, but some very good plays made by G2 towards the back half of the game. Let's talk about it. What did G2 do well? Well, the macro game. I really think the end portion of this, they were just always in the right spot. They knew exactly when they wanted to fight and exactly when they wanted to let things go. And I think that really helped them a lot. Flakkid obviously getting snowballed out of control here on the Draven always helps. Draven in late game situations when he's just super fed is always going to be a positive. Caps playing Ahri, a champion he can actively be aggressive on, even if he didn't have the best of plays early in the game, was able to get to the point where basically after 20-25 minutes, it didn't feel like he could miss a single charm. Basically, it was point and click for him, so very, very good game from Caps. And then you got to shout out Jankos, who played the Trundle pretty expertly in this game. Jankos kind of been a little up and down over the course of the split. A pretty normal Jankos split, quite frankly, where some games he looks good, some games he just probably doesn't take all that seriously. But when he's playing his best and when he's on, he's the best jungler in the LEC, and we saw that in this game. He goes up against Elyoya, who a lot of people see as the best jungler in the LEC, and Jankos just obliterated him, quite frankly. Was a lot better than him on the Trundle. Better macro sense, better pressure, better objective control, better decision-making. The Trundle was just such a problem in the late game that it was really difficult, I think, for the enemy team to actively get onto any of the carries. But you gotta shout out Targamas as well. A pretty perfect game of Lulu overall, I think, from Targamas. He's been, like, up and down, I would say, over the course of the split. Some good, some bad. A lot of good recently since G2's kind of gotten back on track. But Targamas was really solid here on the Lulu. This is basically the perfect game of Lulu. No one on this team was ever going to die, whether that be Draven, whether that be Ahri, even Trundle or Gwen. No one on this team was ever in a position where they were actually scared, unless Broken Blade just went way too far in, which he did a couple times. But Targamas did such a great job of keeping everyone alive while keeping himself positioned while also doing damage. This is basically a perfect game of Lulu. I was very close to giving Targamas the player of the game here, but it is going to go to Jankos. I just felt like he had a little bit more impact on the macro game and on the map as a whole. So Jankos is going to get my player of the game, but a really solid game from G2. As for Mad Lions, tough loss here. Definitely don't want to go into... It's not the worst loss in the world. It's the second best team in terms of standings, but you had first place in your grasp, in your control. All you had to do was follow through on it. Unfortunately, you couldn't win against G2 here, but there is some time to bounce back still. There is some positives from this game. I thought Niski actually played really well in the early game, making plays on the Taliyah around the map, as he has pretty much the whole season. He was playing better than Caps. I think for a significant amount of the early game, he just fell off significantly harder. And then Unforgiven wasn't all that bad. He was never really out of position, but as an Aphelios with the Leona going into a Draven specifically, like, you really just have to pray and hope that he doesn't get ahead. And when he did, it's just going to be really difficult for you to have a lot of impact on the game as a whole. Really, the two players that I think had the designation of being the duds here were the top two, Armut and Elyoya. Armut's going to get my dud of the series here on the Jax. If you want to go for that Jax split pushing role, you do have to play it well. And unfortunately, Armut just has not been all that good for Mad Lions this year. I think people are super overrating his impact on this team. To me, he's not even in the discussion for All-Pro. He's been one of the more overrated top laners in the league, and I think he's actively been a detriment to Mad Lions for a majority of this split. He was not able to go up against Broken Blade, even when Broken Blade was making a ton of mistakes here on the Gwen. Just really no pressure at all from Armut on that Jax, making the game a very, very difficult 4v5. And then Elyoya just got clapped in the jungle matchup. There's really no other way to talk about that. He was not on the same level as Jankos in terms of map pressure, in terms of objective control. They just simply were not, you know, on the same wavelength here. So even if Niski, I think, did play really well early game, the rest of the team really wasn't all that there to back him up. But outlook-wise for these two teams, they're now tied at first place in the standings. It's going to be very interesting. Obviously, no tiebreakers in, like, we get tiebreaker games as opposed to, like, head-to-head wins or anything like that in the LEC. So, if both of these teams continue to win and win out, they're going to be sitting in a position where they might play another game towards the back half here. Obviously, both of these teams should be favored in pretty much whatever matchup they go into because they're both playing really good League of Legends for the most part right now. But G2 looking really, really phenomenal, looking like the best team in the LEC, and I think we can all say that we hope that they keep that up. Moving on to day 2 now, day 2 of the Super Week here in the LEC, the final week of the season. We've got a fun matchup between Team BDS and Rogue, and of course, Rogue bottles this game. BDS picks up a win where they absolutely don't need it. You gotta love it that they're still playing and they're still trying to play spoiler. And it was a lot of fun here. This is a pretty costly one for Rogue, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But BDS puts themselves, you know, in a great position in the early game here. Malrang certainly with some interesting jungle pathing. And Xmatty, Nuclear, and Synchron all just get ahead and are able to basically snowball the game out of control for BDS. A huge win. It doesn't really matter for them, but it's huge for Rogue to not have won this game. So let's talk about it. BDS played really well here. Honestly, shout out to Xmatty and Limit, because Xmatty gets a lot of shit online. Most of the time, it's rightfully so. He's not been all that good for BDS this year, but this was a good game. Like, this was a good game from him. He was never really at all in any danger or out of position. He was really doing a lot of damage, especially in the late game, but he was kind of bodying the Kalista Taric lane as well. Kind of a very risky and aggressive lane from the side of Rogue, and it just got punished really hard by both Xmatty and Limit here on the Rakan. A really good job of that bot lane to gain an advantage and do really well. Xmatty's actually going to be my player of the game here for BDS. He actually played this, I thought, really, really well. And I don't know if they win if he's not playing like this. If he's playing more like the Xmatty that, they maybe used to have. Now, obviously, it's a lot easier when the rest of your team's doing so well, but just worth pointing out that he was a big part of that win. You also have Syncroft here on the Wukong, who was just dominant in the jungle, partly because Malrang did, like, the most interesting thing of all time, which I'll just talk about now. Obviously, I've never seen this where you start red buff on bot side, and then at level 2, you run to top side, flash pillar to try to get the kill top lane. And he got the kill, they got the kill, but it put him so far behind in terms of gold that he was just never going to be able to catch up to a Wukong and actively be able to deal with him. And that's what happened. Syncroft just kind of took the game out of control from that point. A very weird play from Malrang that I guess worked, and I guess he was just really hoping to get the Gwen snowballing, but it put his own game so far behind, and I can't even imagine what would have happened if that didn't work. Like, the game was genuinely over if that didn't work, but at least he had an opportunity to get a kill up there, and, shout out Syncroft. He took advantage of all that. Syncroft was super far ahead of Malrang in the jungle pretty much this entire game, and did a great job to abuse that. Did a great job to impact a lot of lanes, bot lane, mid lane included, even top lane at points. But also Nuclear he played well on the Swain, wasn't really that eventful of a laning phase against Larson, but, just Swain things in the late game, can't really die, is going to do a lot of damage. Shout out. If you get there, it's a good pick. So overall, good game from BDS, but a really good game from Syncroft and Xmatty, in my opinion. And then for Rogue, like I said, Malrang don't really understand what the point was of that play in the top lane. Like, I get it. You want to punish Aggressivu for burning flash early, but at the same time, like no flash, what? Blah. It's just such a bad play overall. I don't know. It's not good. He's gonna get my dud of the game. I think that even if it worked, I was gonna say even if it worked, it did work, and it put him so far behind that I just don't get it. So yeah, that play put him to the position where he had to play from behind. He didn't really play all that well from that position either. I do think it was salvageable, but he didn't play all that well. He got out jungled by Syncroft. Syncroft controlled the whole map. Malrang had no pressure. I think the same could be said for Comp and Trimby in the bottom lane. I was just praising them in their series earlier today where it really felt like they were playing really well. They just straight up got outplayed by Xmatty and Limit in this game. There was really no other way to put it, and it's going to happen. Like, Kalista Taric is a lane that is super aggro, especially in this meta. Like, you have to go for the kills, and just didn't really work all that well in this. Sivir was able to get ahead, and at that point, it's basically GG's. Like, you're never going to catch up to her at that point, so... but shout out Larson. He played all right on the RE. Not really a ton of mistakes. He's off the Talia, which I think is overall a good thing. Rogue, I think BDS actually banned it in this game, which is it's questionable. But, let Larson play Talia if he's going to play it. He doesn't play it all that well. Larson's RE is much better, and I think he showed that in this game. Even if mid lane was a tad bit boring, he at least had some sort of impact on the back half of this game. But overall, outlook-wise, BDS doesn't matter. They're out of playoffs. They won a game. Great. But as for Rogue... this actively knocks them out of a chance at number 1 seed. Like, they are no longer possible to get number 1 seed, which is sucky for them. Means they're not going to be able to auto-qualify for Worlds before they even get to the, play the first best of 5. That option is still open for G2, obviously, but Rogue's going to have to at least have some things go right for them in the playoffs to have that opportunity available, but they're definitely going to have to bounce back. They have a very important game against Vitality in tomorrow's game, and that's going to be huge for them to see if they can bounce back and put themselves in a good position, but it's going to look like another middle of the road, 2 or 3 seed, 4 seed maybe, run for Rogue in the regular season, and it feels pretty commonplace for this organization at this point. Moving on to our second game here of day 2. We had a very interesting one, a battle of two teams that are on the outskirts of the playoffs trying to make their way in. We had SK Gaming taking on Excel. Excel picking up a huge win here. If they didn't win this, they were in a really, really dire strait. But Excel picks up the win. The Year of the Duck is still alive. It is still possible for Excel to make playoffs. They're sitting at 8-9 now. This does eliminate SK Gaming from the playoffs, unfortunately. So no God Gilius miracle run. None of that's going to be happening here. Unfortunately, Excel has ended the miracle, but Excel picks up a big win, and they're going to be really happy about it. So let's talk about what they did right here. Honestly, I don't know, because they really shouldn't have been in that much of a position to win this game. They played the early game pretty poorly. Most notably, Mickey played the early game quite bad, to the point where Jezu got super duper fed on Draven. And obviously, Mickey has been a problem all year long, but he just played so aggressive on the Tahm Kench that Draven was able to capitalize on it and get snowballing, get out of control. And I've talked about this. If you're a Draven and you've gotten out of control, there is simply no reason you shouldn't win that game. You've got a Poppy, you've got a Taliyah, you've got Nautilus for engages. Like, you have everything you could possibly need. This game should be unlosable for SK Gaming, but just team fight after team fight after team fight. Excel claws their way back into a situation where Patrick's now at 500 CS on Sivir, and he's doing a bajillion damage. Like, even the Draven, the super-fed Draven can't keep up with that kind of damage. He's focusing all of his targets still on Mickey, which is a problem. And Nukeduck and Patrick are doing a ton on the backline, and they end up winning teamfight after teamfight and taking the game here. A really, really well slow-played game. They lost the early game, but they knew what they had to do. They knew how to get to the win condition. They have Azir Sivir. They know if they get to 45 minutes, they're probably going to be favored over Draven Taliyah. And so they just did their best to stall it out and get there, and they absolutely did. They did a great job. Patrick's going to get my player of the game here because he did get there on the Sivir. And honestly, his early game wasn't all that bad. It was mostly Mickey kind of running it on the Tahm Kench. But overall, just a really good game by Patrick to know what he has to do, to know he has to get the gold, to know he has to get the 5 or so items on Sivir, 4 or so items on Sivir. And, you know, get to that point where he can just take over the team fights. And he did that. Nukeduck also, you got to give praise to him. He played the mid lane matchup really well. Sometimes Taliyah versus Azir can be a huge problem for the Azir because Taliyah can cause such an impact across the map that even if the Azir is ahead by a considerable margin, it's not enough to negate the impact that Taliyah caused in the other lanes. But Nukeduck did a great job of maintaining his positioning in fights, some really clutch ultimates, and just some really good gameplay overall. I think everybody on XL basically did their part, maybe with the exception of Mickey, but even then, like, at least he was a target in the late game for G2 to go on and try and kill so that the rest of the team could have some time to free fire on the backline. But for SK Gaming, this is a tough loss. Obviously, knocks you out of playoff contention. You don't love that, but you had this game in the palm of your hand. This should be unlosable for you with the Fed Draven. It's just the rest of the team not playing all that well. You gotta first point out Genax in the top lane. He's gonna get my dud of the game here for SK Gaming. This was not a good game of set. There's a reason that we don't see this champion all that often in pro play right now. It's because he is very risky, honestly. Like, he's not all that safe. When he goes in and gets all his stuff in, there's a real chance that he gets bursted down. Even if he does have time to activate his Haymaker, like, how much longer is he really going to be surviving after that? Like, he's just not all that efficient with what he does, especially into other tanks in a laning phase where you just know he's not going to be getting an advantage. Genax positioned himself very poorly. Some really aggressive flashes that just did not work out for him and the team. So, unfortunately, Genax is going to get my dud of the game here on the set. But you gotta say, G2, like, I get it, you're ahead and you're fed and you're doing a good job, but you gotta have better target priority in those late game team fights. I think if he was actively going on, you know, even just Marcoon or somebody that was more actively protecting the backline, I think that SK might have been in a better position here to win the fights. But unfortunately, his target selection was just so bad that this Draven was doing damage, but it was two targets that didn't matter really at all. Mostly the Tahm Kench. And that's just not what you want to do. You don't want to throw all of your axes into the big tank and just have Sivir ricochet you to death in the backline. Like, you're never going to be able to win that team fight, even if you're significantly more fed. And I think G2 could have definitely played those fights better. But overall, outlook-wise, super unfortunate that SK is not going to be able to make playoffs. Obviously, they never really should have been in a position to do that in the first place, but nobody in the LEC has been consistent enough to knock them out. They are officially knocked out here, and it sucks. You know, I do think players like Genax and Certus had relatively good years, significantly better ones than I expected, but man, at times, Gilius was just a little bit too heavy for this team to carry. G2 and Treats don't really have the synergy that I think you would want out of a bot lane that has been playing together for 2 years, and unfortunately, it just wasn't going to come together for SK this year. As for Excel, they keep their dream alive. They still have to win out, and they still have a very important game against Astralis tomorrow, but this is the step in the right direction. Even if Mickey and Finn still aren't playing perfect, if Patrick can step up, if Nukeduck can step up, if Marcoon can step up, you are going to be able to put yourself in a good position to at least win that game and give yourself an opportunity to make playoffs if things can go right for you. Obviously, things are going to have to go right in terms of the rest of the teams losing, but there's too much talent on this team for me to think that they shouldn't be in playoff contention, and at least they're putting themselves in the right opportunity to do so after a couple of weeks of really down action from this Excel team. Moving on to our third game here of day 2 action. we had a fun one between Mad Lions and Astralis. Mad Lions picking up a very crucial win here to keep themselves alive in that #1 seed discussion. They would love to go into the playoffs. I think it's the #1 seed. Obviously, it does wonders for your world chances if you go in at #1, but even outside of that, just the opportunity to not have to play one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the league in the first round, I think is obviously going to be a plus. And they come through in the clutch here, winning a pretty important game. They did take a little while to close it out, mostly because the early game was a little bit up and down, I think, for Mad, but overall, a pretty good end of the game here, and some very good team fighting. I want to give the player of the game here. I know Broadcast gave it to Niski, but for me, I'm going to give player of the game to Unforgiven. I think the Sivir was the most important member of the team in this game, no question. Without that Sivir in the back half of these team fights, the game is just simply not close. Another game where we get 500 CS Sivir, and we just see it take over. Cloud Soul, 500 CS Sivir with ultimate, with a Lulu, like, too much. It's too much. Like, the Sivir is unkillable if you let the situation happen. And obviously, I don't think Sivir is, like, OP in the sense of we have to ban her every game kind of OP, but she is kind of annoying to play into, especially if you let her get to her win condition, which she got to this game, and I think Unforgiven really took advantage of that and basically won these last team fights for Mad Lions, so he's going to get my player of the game here. Gotta give credit to Kaiser where it's due. He was very good on this Lulu, keeping that Sivir alive, and not only that, but making this Sivir such an absolute unit to have to actually deal with in the late game. Even in the early game, just doing a really good job of negating a lot of the pressure that Kabe and Jonghoon put on in lane. Overall, just a really good game, I think, from the Mad Lions bot lane in general. And then you gotta shout out Niski, who was really good on the Sylas, even if he wasn't the most impactful member like his score may point out. I thought he was really, really good. Obviously, Sylas is a huge pick here. I really like Sylas into Ahri. I really like Sylas into Zeri as well, most of the time, because that ultimate can honestly be a problem to steal, and so really, really like what you're doing here with Niski. He's just kind of the core, the glue, if you will, that kind of enables everybody else. I think you could realistically say that he was, you know, the most important player in this game, but for me, without that Sivir, I just don't think they win the fight. So even if Unforgiven made a few more mistakes, he's going to get player of the game. That's not an indictment on Niski, though. He still played really well. Oyoya and Armit were there. They were fine. As for Astralis, another bad game. Another bad game for Astralis, coming back-to-back here. Fnatic earlier in the week wasn't great. This one against Mad Lions, also not great. They were in a position to win this. Again, I feel like they really were in a spot where they could have just taken over this game, but some really bad misplays from the bottom lane here. Jonghoon has this full engage where he misses literally everything. Like, it's one of those, like, yellow star moments where it's just like, oh my god. Like, I know you're a good player, but, like, this is just not a clip you're ever going to want to remember. And unfortunately, Jonghoon had one of those in this game on the Bard. Not great from him. Definitely had some moments where he was just completely caught out in some very big mechanical misplays. And then for Kabe, like, he played these late game team fights about as poorly as you can play them as a Zeri. Obviously, you can do a lot on Zeri, especially with peel from Shyvana and Wukong, but you gotta hit the right targets. You can't go chasing the 1% Sejuani out of the fight and just kind of chasing her, and then all of a sudden, Sivir's killing your whole team. Like, you have to stick in there, and you have to be able to match damage, and Kabe just didn't have his head in the game, I think, in this one, so definitely some weird ones, although they were the reason they were in this game in the first place, so it's hard for me to give them dud of the game. I'm going to give dud of the game to Dior in the mid lane here on the Ahri. Just got completely outplayed by Niski. Not only in the 1v1, which he did, but also got outplayed macro-wise, where the Sylas was just significantly more impactful on the jungle matchup and on the rest of the lanes getting objectives. Dior just isn't all that good in comparison to a lot of the other mid laners here in the LEC. He doesn't have the macro sense, doesn't really have the mechanics. He could definitely use, I think, some more seasoning in the ERLs before he gets another shot here in the LEC. Not to say he is always going to be an awful player, it very much doesn't seem like he's ready to play in the LEC, or at least that's what he's shown over the course of 2022, in my opinion. He's going to get my dud of the game here, and it's another bad one from him. Chachi and Xerxes were fine, not too bad, but like I said, if Kabe and Jonghoon play the end game a little bit better, I think Astralis actually probably takes this game, and Mad Lions is in full panic mode of falling out of, like, the top 3. But at the end of the day, they weren't able to come up with it. You get to 500 CS Sivir. Unforgiven is able to close it out. Niski and Kaiser play really well. Mad Lions comes away with the win. They're going to be happy for that. Outlook-wise, Astralis isn't eliminated from playoffs, but it's going to be very tough for them to make playoffs. Pretty much everything is going to have to go wrong for everyone else around them. And that's just so super unlikely that basically they're eliminated from playoffs with this loss. Obviously, they weren't a team that I think was expecting to make playoffs coming into the season, so I think this season generally has been an overextension of expectations because of Jonghoon and because Kabe and Xerxes have played a little bit out, of their shoes a little bit so far this year, but overall, it's definitely tough to get knocked out of playoffs, especially against one of the best teams in the league. But Mad Lions maintains their grip on number 1 seed. It is definitely still possible for them, even if it isn't still like ridiculously likely. G2 is definitely in a good spot here, but overall, Mad Lions doing what they have to do, picking up a win where they have to, and putting themselves in the position that they probably most want to be in. Jumping into our 4th game here of day 2, we had another pretty influential one when it came to the standings outlook for the LEC. We had Team Vitality taking on Fnatic, and Fnatic picking up a really huge win here to put themselves actually in a really good spot when it came to their playoff hopes. Obviously, going into this week, they had to start winning, and when they have done, they beat Astralis, they beat Vitality, they put themselves in a good spot. And a lot of it's just their bot lane. Holy crap, did the bot lane show up today. Obviously, Upset and Hilly haven't been perfect all year long, especially Hilly. But man, did they show up here today, and man, did they crush Vitality and cause them to panic after a 50-minute game. Kind of unbelievable, an absolute banger. But let's talk about what Fnatic was able to do here. Zeri got online. There's really no other way to put it. This was a 1v9, or a 2v9, really. But, I mean, whoo-lee, like, this was insane from Upset to be able to carry this game. Part of it's the champion, obviously. I know Zeri is completely overloaded, especially when you give her someone like a Lulu to be able to compound on top of, but Upset played this game so ridiculously well that you just have to shout him out. He was so perfect in terms of his positioning, in terms of being able to do damage and manage his threat level and never really be in a position where he was about to die. Like, great game from Upset, and a great game from Hylissang as well to really assist in that. Obviously, Zeri can't do it all on her own. She can try her absolute best to stay alive, but eventually, if she doesn't have peel, people are going to get on her. Hylissang on the Lulu is basically assurance that that can never happen. He kept Upset alive for so long, and those two worked so tirelessly to completely take over the game in the latter half that, I mean, really, they were unstoppable. They were completely unstoppable in the bottom lane here. So Upset gets player of the game, but Hylissang also played genuinely phenomenally here on the Lulu. A huge game from the Fnatic bot lane that has been relatively quiet, at least over the course of the split so far, for both good and for bad for this Fnatic team. But the rest of the team wasn't actually all that perfect. Humanoid definitely had some int moments in this game. So did Perks, but they were just kind of going back and forth here. The Sylas into Azir matchup can be really good for both sides, mostly Sylas, I think, for the most part. And Humanoid just didn't play it perfectly. He was very aggressive in when he wanted to engage, very much overestimated, I think, a lot of his healing, and Hylissang just wasn't ever going to get off of Zeri. So it's not like you were ever going to get a lot of shields here on the Sylas anyways from your Lulu. I think he just overestimated that and ended up dying significantly more than he probably had to in this game, but still, it's whatever. Razor got that played well. I think he was a good player, and then Wunder was just kind of there on the Gragas. Not super influential, but a good late game tank. Wunder always plays Gragas well, so. Moving on to Fnatic. Couple players that I think you could have given the dud of the series to for me. It's going to go to Carzzy, mostly because while Perks, I think, definitely had some very int moments and was out of position considerably frequently, and while he definitely was in debate for this dud of the series, you just can't convince me that Carzzy's build is acceptable. Like, this is such a low damage, low, I don't know, anything build. Like, I get the Kraken Slayer, Rapid Fire Cannon, like, Ginsu's, it's all good stuff, but, like, Edge of Night? Like, what is that? It's 50 minutes. Sell that. Get something better. You can do better than that. You're Senna. And I just don't get it. It wasn't, I mean, it was pretty troll, I think, overall from Carzzy. And I think he got to the point where he was actually, like, useless late game. He wasn't doing any damage. He was a stun. He could heal a little bit, but the healing was done in, like, 2 autos by Zeri, so it didn't even really matter. Yeah, I think you could give it to Perks, like I said, because he definitely had some int moments, but I think Perks had significantly more of an impact on how the team fights were going in the last half of the game than Carzzy did, and I think Carzzy was honestly just as bad in terms of positioning, so Carzzy's gonna get my dead of the game, but if you wanted to give it to Perks, I understand too. LeBron honestly wasn't all that bad, neither was Alfari or Haru. Like, I really don't think the other players here on Vitality were all that negative. The problem was just that they're not the ones that have to be good. Like, the Gnar, the Trundle, the Tom, like, they're not the ones that have to step up for this comp. It has to be the Azir, it has to be the Senna. And unfortunately, they just didn't do that here in this game. And so Vitality wasn't able to take it late. They were just going to get outplayed by Upset and Hilly over and over again. Outlook-wise for these two teams, big loss for Vitality here. This puts them in a must-win position going into the final day against Rogue, a team that is good. Even if they didn't show it today against BDS, They are a good team, and it's a tough game to win. They have to win that now in order to not force a tiebreaker, I think, with one of the other teams here, either Excel or Astralis, I believe. And that is not a good situation to be in. Maybe even Fnatic, depending on how things go. There are a lot of situations now, but Vitality now has to win. Basically in day 3, going 0-2 to start this week is pretty giga awful for them. From Fnatic's perspective, if they beat Misfits tomorrow, they're not only locked for playoffs, they're like the 4 or 5 seed in playoffs, depending on how things go. That is actually insane. They have worked their way back up. A phenomenal super week from them to go 9-8 so far over the first 2 days. Basically, things couldn't go better for them right now. Obviously, they put themselves in a considerable hole in the midseason of summer, but they're digging themselves out of it, and they're honestly peaking at the right time, going right into playoffs. If they can just pull out a few more wins, there is a lot of hype for this Fnatic team. Moving on to our 5th and final game here of Day 2 action. Remember, we are in the super final week of LEC here, so it's 3 full days of LEC action, plus any tiebreakers that may happen at the end. But we're ending off Day 2 with another really interesting top-of-the-table clash between Misfits Gaming and G2 Esports. G2 picks up a super important win here. Misfits can't topple the Giants, and so, fortunately, G2 is going to be sitting atop the LEC standings still here, tied with Mad Lions, but owning the tiebreaker here. Great game from G2 overall. This was really dominant. They were just straight up the better team on pretty much every regard. And it's a little bit worrisome for Misfits on that regard, kind of going back to some of the worries I had with them throughout most of the season. But let's talk about G2 for a second. Caps is really good. I don't usually like to compare games in the same week, kind of back-to-back like this, but we just saw the Vitality Fnatic game where we saw Humanoid try to take over the game on the Sylas, try to get those late game engages, try to be an impact in those late game team fights, and just not really have the same kind of impact. And then you put someone like Caps on Sylas, and he just completely takes over the game. Like, it's not even remotely the same kind of impact. Caps is just built different. He's just on a different level when he's playing at his best, and he's pretty freaking good right now, if I'm being honest. Even if he's had some int games this season, which he definitely has. I would be lying if I said he didn't. He's been really phenomenal for G2, and someone that's definitely a carry for this G2 roster. He's getting a player of the game for me. He was awesome in this matchup against Misfits. Obviously going up against one of the better mids in the region as well in VTO and just kind of destroying him, both in lane and out of lane in the macro sense. Just a really great game from Caps. Flaken and Targamas continue to be great. I love the Ashe support here. It's really grown on me as a pick. It was something I really wasn't all that interested in for a majority of the year, but I've seen some good teams pilot it, and I really get the idea now, especially into something like Zeri, where I think it could be such a huge problem for Zeri to, like, actively pursue with an Ashe on her tail. Like, that's awesome. Really, really great plays here from Targamas as well. They both played it really well, even if they weren't the hyper carries. And then Broken Blade and Yankas doing their thing. Yone in the top lane's always a fun matchup here, and Broken Blade plays the Yone super well. Into the Sejuani, it's going to be a really aggressive matchup for the Yone, and he's able to take advantage of it and get his lead. Yankas does a good job of making sure that everybody's in a good position, but him and Caps team up really well, and Yankas just controls the entire map, gets every single objective. This game really was never in in any doubt, if I'm being completely honest with you. But moving over to the Misfits side, not perfect. Certainly not the perfect game here. This is a team that I think this is more of the Misfits that I think I expected to see this season, and less of the one that I think has actually showed up. Obviously, Misfits has been a very good team for a majority of the year, but at some time, like you just have to look at the roster and go, like, are they as talented as some of the other top teams in the LEC? And you start to get worried about that. And this was a game where I think that worry kind of came to fruition, where it's just, they kind of got outskilled. There's really no other way to say it. There aren't a lot of teams that can just shut down VTO, but G2 is one of them, because Caps is really that phenomenal. When Caps has a game like this, you're going to have to rely on a lane that isn't VTO in order to gain an advantage over the map, and this team just doesn't do that very consistently. Not a very good game from Zanzara. He's going to get my dead of the game here, completely out-jungled in terms of map pressure, in terms of objective pressure, just everything against Yankas. Just anything that he got by trading his entire map for it. So, not a great game from Zanzara. Not the worst, game a jungler's had this split. Certainly not. We've seen some pretty bad performances in the jungle, but still not a great performance from Zanzara. Not great from Irrelevant either. Like I said, tough matchup into the Yone as the Sejuani, but at the same time, at least be relevant late game. And then Neon and Mersa just got beat in the bottom lane. Like I said, VTO got out-pressured. Even if he wasn't, like, bad, he didn't have, like, a lot of int performances, he also just didn't really have that big of an impact on the game because he was the second most important mid in the game. So overall, Misfits just got outskilled here. There's really no other way to put it. I think this is a really bad matchup for Misfits generally, and I think Misfits is really hoping and praying they don't see G2 in the playoffs. I think they would have a better shot against pretty much anybody else in the league, but as for G2, this puts them in a great spot. Obviously, tied for first. You'd love to see it. This team wants to get first place. They want to see themselves as the most talented team in the league, and they've been playing like it recently. Really, the performance of this team has been stepped up in recent weeks, even if they had some question marks around weeks 3 and 4. I think the end of the season, the last month or so, has been pretty phenomenal for G2, and I think everybody is just kind of hoping they're able to keep up this pace and be the best team in Europe like they should be. Moving on to our third and final day of Week 8 LEC action, and it was a very important day 3. This is where we really get to solidify a lot of what the playoff standings are going to look like. In fact, all of what the playoff standings are going to look like. And we kick off with a very important game to start with. Of course, I am talking about Excel taking on Astralis, and Excel picks up a very needed victory. If they don't win this game, they are out of the playoffs, but this win keeps their dream alive. It is still out of their hands. They still need things to go right. Either Fnatic or if Fnatic loses to Misfits, oops, that's not good. Also, if Vitality beats Rogue, oops, that's not good. So a lot of things still need to go right for Excel in order to even be in a position to try and make playoffs, but it technically is still possible. So let's talk about this game and what they did to keep their dream alive here. Excel was just the better team, basically from start to finish, mostly based off of this bottom lane. Now, I think a lot of people could talk about this draft and be like, oh, why did Astralis do this? Because this is not a very good Astralis draft. Obviously, there are some things here that I certainly question, but at the end of the day, you know, we live with it, but Excel took advantage. Like, I always talk about this. Draft diff matters, but only as much as you can execute on the difference. And so if you're the worst team, sometimes it really just does not matter if you outdraft them. Fortunately for Excel, they were the better team here today, so they got to take advantage of a lot of the weaknesses that Astralis created in draft, most notably this bottom lane. Like Zeri Renata into Ezreal Karma is just not an even bot lane trade here. Zeri is, once she gets online, like what is Ezreal going to do to even remotely compete with what Zeri can put out in terms of damage, both in the mid game and in the late game? Obviously, Ezreal does a lot of damage, but it won't even be nearly on the same level. You have to be hyper carry levels of damage to even try to match, or you have to try and beat her early so that you can snowball out of control. I don't think Ezreal does either of those things, and so the Zeri gets online and she just kind of takes over the game. It's really that simple. I want to give a lot of credit to Patrick, but I want to give even more credit, honestly, in this game to Mickey X. Shout out Mickey. I've been very hard on him over the course of the split because he's been very bad. Like, there's really no other way to put it. He's been probably the worst support in the region. But I have to commend this performance because, honestly, it was super duper good from him. He comes out here with the Renata, goes into the Ezreal Karma, which we've already established is not great. But he really controls the pace of this laning phase. Sometimes Karma into Renata can be a little bit tricky to play out as the Renata if you don't have like a really aggressive ADC with you. But I think Mickey does a great job of managing potential poke in this lane, like keeping Zeri and himself in a spot where they can continue to trade and they continue to push forward and continue to try to make plays in their own lane, even if it's calling Marcoon over or something like that. I thought Mickey did a really good job early, and then, man, Renata late game is just such a cheat code if she's, like, at all in the game, because that ultimate is just always good. There is never a situation in which that ultimate is not super duper good, and Mickey played it really well all game long. So, Mickey's actually going to get my player of the game here. He was really, really solid on the Renata, and it's a great bounce back game from someone who I think has really kind of fallen off the wagon just a tad bit in recent weeks. But shout out Patrick and Mickey. They played really well. Got to give a big shout out to Nuke Duck as well. Obviously, going into the Sylas, I talk about this as being relatively even. I know some mid lane mains have told me that this is an Azir counter pick. Like Azir is good in this matchup. I don't see that from a macro sense. Like, if I'm the Sylas, I'm just never in lane, and I'm just trying to make plays elsewhere. I'm playing it like I'm Talia, right? And I think you can do that. Dior did a little bit of that in this game for sure, being able to pick up some kills in the top lane. But outside of that, like, Nuke Duck is going to be given a lot of time to get ahead in this one, and he did. He got a lot of gold and was able to capitalize on it. Really do like how he played the mid game here, making a lot of plays around the map. Usually you don't see the Azir be as proactive as that, but really, really good plays here from Nuke Duck, and generally just a good game from him. Marcoon, one of the better games he's played in quite a while, obviously. I think he's flown a little bit under the radar for this Excel team during their loss streak, but as a jungler, quite frankly, it's just very difficult to look good when your team is losing. even if you're not playing all that bad. I really don't think Marcoon has been all that bad, even during the losing streak, and he was very good before it. But this is a good performance to kind of turn that around against Xerxes, and then Finn was fine. It's a Scion. Who really cares? Astralis, on the other hand, not good. Like, they were technically still in playoffs before this game, but this has officially knocked them out very clearly. Kabe and Jonghoon have been their saving graces all year, and unfortunately, in Super Week 8 here, they were the hindrances for Astralis. Kabe and Jonghoon did not have a very good week for them, really in any of the 3 games, and it really came back to bite them here. The Ezreal Karma, like I talked about, is just never going to have the pressure that it needs to in order to stop Zeri from getting completely online and destroying the game. And so, unfortunately, Zeri got online and destroyed the game. Now, I'm not going to say it was entirely Kabe and Jonghoon's fault, because it's not like they played tremendously horribly, but in my opinion, that draft was bad enough in order for me to say, like, it just didn't matter, right? So Kabe's going to get my dud of the game here. You just can't pick the Ezreal as a response to Zeri. It's really not something that can actively work. Even if you're Kabe and you're really good at Ezreal, like, Ezreal's just never going to be able to keep up, ever, in lane or out of lane. Like, I just don't see a point in the game where Ezreal actually has the advantage there. The Karma, I think, can help the situation at least a little bit, but Jonghoon was never really in a spot to actively pressure the lane. Like I said, Patrick and Mickey just played it straight out better, and I think that was definitely apparent in this game. Dior was kind of the saving grace for Astralis. He was at least trying to make plays here on the Sylas. Like I said, you can be a bit of a macro presence on Sylas if the Azir wants to stick in his own lane, and I think oftentimes that's what Azirs want to do, and so the Sylas was able to make some plays around the map, obviously taking advantage of, Zeri pushing up, Trundle, I believe, once, a couple times with Sion. Just overall an okay game, I would say, overall for Dior, but it didn't really matter because Xerxes and Chachi were essentially non-existent. You flex the Poppy to the top lane in order to draft Viego, get yourself out of the Poppy Trundle matchup. I really don't think that matchup was that bad for Poppy. Like, I get it's a little bit of a win for Trundle, but I don't think it's, like, that bad, like, to the point where you need to flex it top lane and play it into Sion. At this point, you're just drafting Viego in the jungle for no reason, right? Like, Poppy top is not all that strong right now. I think it's fine into Zion, generally, just because you can kind of just ignore the lane. But overall, you're missing out on the opportunity to have maybe a stronger tank up there, and that's a little bit disappointing. And then Viego, obviously, I'm not a huge fan of as a pick in general. So overall, not a great game from Astralis. Outlook-wise, Astralis is out now. They had their shot. Not a lot of people really expected them to take advantage of that shot, but going into the week, they were in a position that potentially they could have made playoffs. Tough week, though, and unfortunately, after the 0-3, they definitely do not. They fall to 7-11, and that's going to be their record at the end of the year. Excel has put themselves in a good position. They're at 500, sitting at 9-9, pretty much exactly where they need to be. Like I said, some things need to go right. There are a couple games that need to go in their favor here today, but if that happens, they're going to be sitting in a spot that, I don't know, maybe potentially they could be in the playoffs. Obviously, that would be great after the last few weeks they had. Having a really good week here, going 2-1, picking up the wins where they needed to was super duper important, and obviously, I think they can say that they did all that they could do. Maybe the Rogue win would have been huge, but that's a tough thing to ask. So overall, Excel did what they had to do, and now it's up to Fate to see if they finish 7th again. Moving on to our second game here of Day 3 action. We've got a fun one, a top versus bottom team clash. Oh, these are always a little bit of fun to watch. Of course, I'm talking about Team BDS taking on Mad Lions. Mad Lions do pick up the win, although it is not nearly as clean as maybe you would expect a Mad Lions win over BDS to look. BDS came out fighting, and they definitely tried, but at the end of the day, Mad was just the better team, and they are able to take a huge win that does keep them alive in the #1 seed race. G2 obviously still has to get it done against SK later in the day in order to lock it in. But honestly, shout out to BDS for putting it up. We will talk about Mad first here. I think this was a good game overall. Definitely some mistakes, definitely some over-aggression, but I would rather see that than too passive a play, especially against a bad team. Go out there and try and beat them, and that's what Mad Lions did. Niski gets to pick the Vex. Vex is honestly like a pick that I'm kind of pretty okay with. Like, I certainly think in good hands the pick can be good, and into LeBlanc, I actually think it's a pretty good matchup for the Vex. You can do a lot of what LeBlanc wants to do, but you do it significantly safer and with significantly more options, and so I kind of like the Vex pick here, even if he was a tad bit over-aggressive in the game. Niski was still a huge reason why Mad Lions was in such a good position, continuously engaging on the backline, getting the resets, killing people over and over again. This Vex pick can really get snowballing out of control if it's doing well, and Niski, I thought, had a really good game on it. So Niski is going to get my player of the game here, even if he did have some moments where it was a little bit questionable on some engages. I would rather him make too many plays than not enough plays, especially on a champion that relies on making plays quite like Vex. So very much enjoy how he played. It was a good game for him overall. Want to give a big shout out to this bot lane here. Unforgiven and Kaiser really did destroy Xmatty and Limit. That was the other big matchup that I think went super in Mad Lions' favor, was this bot lane. Unforgiven had a really good game on the Sivir, playing it into the Aphelios, obviously. Both scale really hard, and you just get to the point where Sivir's going to win in a more traditional front-to-back sense. Aphelios kind of has to finagle a little bit more to get ahead. He probably should have a lead, so he can just two-shot people with his guns in the late game, but if Xmatty couldn't get to that point, he still thinks it's 2020, unfortunately. He tried to bruiser Aphelios and walk in, ult, and just hope to survive everything, and it just did not work, and he was caught out multiple times in team fights. Unforgiven and Kaiser were doing a really good job of taking advantage of that, not only in the late game, but also in the early game as well with that Rakan in the bot. But overall, just a really good game for Mad. Niski kind of all over the map. Unforgiven getting a lot of gold. Elyoya doing some good stuff on the Wukong as well. For BDS, honestly, like, this wasn't a bad game, really, at all. Especially considering who they were playing against. Considering their talent level, they played pretty well here. Like, it certainly wasn't perfect. Like I said, bot lane kind of got run over. Xmatty is going to be my dud of the game. Like I said, Bruiser Aphelios just does not exist anymore, and better positioning in those fights would have certainly made them more interesting. But Limit didn't play all that well on the Galio either. Obviously, the deaths are a little inflated because you're Galio here, but at the end of the day, you can't quite play like Limit played and expect to win. So the bot lane definitely didn't hold up their end of the bargain, but I got to give a lot of credit where credit's due. And Nuclear, it had a really good game here on the LeBlanc. He was really bad for a majority of the season. I detailed this throughout my weekly recaps with BDS, but this was a really good overall week, I would say, from Nuclear. He had some games where he looked okay. Like, against Rogue, he was pretty good. Against Mad, he was pretty good. Those are two good teams with two good mid laners, and I thought Nuclear stepped up to the plate, so this is kind of the thing that he's always done. He's never really been all that important when the games actually matter, and then by the time his team is eliminated, he starts actually showing up and playing some League of Legends. Hopefully, that's not a trend that just continues with Nuclear, but this was a good game of LeBlanc for him, even if it wasn't all that impactful. And then Syncroft and Aggressivu were just kind of there in the top lane. Syncroft got out-jungled by Elyoya, but overall, not a terrible game on the Jarvan, just not a great one either. What does this mean for both teams outlook-wise? Well, I've said it multiple times. BDS has been out. They put up a good fight this season, but I don't expect to see this roster come back for next year, so I don't think a lot of the momentum that they're carrying in right now is going to carry over. As for Mad Lions, this puts them in a good spot. 12-6, it means that G2 struggles in the next game. They have a real shot of getting the #1 seed, and I'm sure they would love to be in that position. So, obviously, they're going to be pushing for that. They're going to be cheering on SK in the next game. It's really out of their hands, but they put themselves in the best possible position. It's that loss early in the week against G2 that really, really struck them. So, unfortunately, it's out of their hands now, but they're just hoping and praying that they can get to that #1 seed. All right, so with Mad's hopes at the #1 seed hanging on with this next game, we got to see how exactly the top of the LEC standings would shake out as we saw SK Gaming taking on G2 Esports. And unfortunately for Mad Lions fans, G2 does pick up the all-crucial victory here and secures themselves the #1 seed in the LEC. Not only that, but they secure themselves because of the 4 seed slots coming out of the LEC, which this playoff bracket is not prepared to handle. G2 has already qualified for Worlds 2022. They are officially the first team in the world to qualify for 2022's World Championships. Good for them. They qualified without ever playing a single best of 5 in the regular season, which is actually absurd. But, I guess they earned it. They looked really good in the regular season here, and they did great at MSI as well. This is a very fun team, and they looked great in this game. This was a little bit of a game where I think both teams kind of just took their shoes off and played for fun. Not that it particularly mattered for either. SK's out of the playoffs, G2 is in the playoffs, and, if G2 doesn't win, whatever, they're the 2 seed, and they just make their bracket run like normal. But G2 wins this, they get their 1 seed, and they play really well. Cool Man Yankos coming out, really, really happy to see that. The Pantheon pick, this is something that we've seen a couple of people try to pull out across the world. This year, multiple people have tried to pull out the Pantheon jungle and really tried to make it work. It really hasn't in any region so far. This game, though, was a little bit different. Yankos and Agilius, this is the kind of matchup where the Pantheon jungle can be a true problem, and it absolutely was. Yankos completely took over the game on the Pantheon. A great week overall from Jankos and a great game from him. He's clearly the player of the game here for G2. He was awesome. Not only was he dominating the Jarvan in the 1v1s in the jungle and in objective control, but also he was impacting every lane. Most notably this top lane, which just like Broken Blade got super far ahead on the Gwen. A really good game from him. He's been hyper consistent all year long. Been very impressed with how Broken Blade has played on G2. In my opinion, it is the best year he's had competitively ever, and I don't even think it's all that close. A really good year from Broken Blade. Caps took more of a supportive role here, pulling out the Lissandra, going 0-3 and 14, like a true backline mid laner should. He looked good, though. Obviously, playing it into the LeBlanc, it's a pretty hard counter to Assassins just in general. Also, it supports the Pantheon incredibly well, because it just keeps him safe in a lot of scenarios. Flakked was able to do a lot of extra damage here on the Aphelios. Targamas was protecting people on the Braum. Also, shout out to Targamas. He's only the second player in LEC history to reach 200 assists in one split, only behind 2020 Mickey. Really, congratulations to him. A great split from him overall, and a great split from G2 as they roll their way to 12-6 and the #1 seed in the LEC. As for SK Gaming, not a great way to end your season, but honestly, it was kind of a fun game, and they did have some moments. Even if all the team didn't show up, I thought G2 and Treats pulling out the Samira Rel, the super deadly kill combo lane that we used to love seeing in the, just in pro play in general. Obviously, neither of these picks all that relevant outside of Abel, maybe, in the LPL. G2 and Treats bring it out here, and they look really good on it. Honestly, the Samira was a pick that kind of popped off. I've been talking about this relatively recently, but with the popularity of Nyla after she has come out, she honestly just feels like a slightly worse Samira, at least in pro play to me, and I think that we can see a champion like Samira actually have a lot of relevance in pro play as long as you play her right. Unfortunately, Samira's just not the champ that can actively win you the game by herself, at least in the meta right now. Rel does a good job of setting her up, and obviously G2 and Treats played well, but can't quite capitalize on it. Certus did not actually play all that bad, but like really, what's the LeBlanc supposed to do into this team comp? A fed Gwen and a fed Pantheon with a Lissandra and a Braum? Like, come on, like what's a LeBlanc actively supposed to do here? Unfortunately, the top side didn't play quite as well. You had Gilius in the jungle, who's going to be my dud of the game here. He just got outplayed by Jankos. There really wasn't all that much debate in that regard, in my opinion. The Jarvan pick is fine, but again, he just isn't as good as Jankos. Jankos showed up today and was just ready to destroy whoever he was going against, and unfortunately, it had to be God Gilius, who had I'm going to admit it, a really, really bad split here on SK. And then Genax here on the Renekton. The Renekton pick just did not work into the Gwen. It's a super Gwen favored matchup in my opinion because all of Renekton's timings of when he should be stronger in that matchup, Gwen can just ignore and just get stronger. So, yeah, I see why Broken Blade won this so hard and why Jankos was so focused on making sure that Broken Blade was in a good spot. Overall, great win for G2. SK's been out. G2 locks #1 seed. This is exactly what you want to see as a G2 fan. Hopefully they can keep up this momentum. Obviously, if they can steamroll teams in the playoffs like they steamrolled SK today, you're going to feel really confident about G2 going to Worlds, but, you know, we're at the situation where even if they don't win a single best of 5, they've already qualified, so a lot could go right, also a lot could go wrong in playoffs for G2. This is where it starts to get interesting with their mental, but it'll be interesting to see how the #1 team in the LEC does come playoff time. Moving on to our 4th game here of day 3, and it's another game with direct playoff implications. Every game from here on out is direct playoff implications. And this was a one between Team Vitality and Rogue. Rogue picks up the win, which means Vitality, you're now in a really rough spot. You're sitting at 9-9, the same record as Excel, interestingly enough, and potentially the same record as Fnatic if Fnatic were to lose to Misfits. Now, your season is not over yet. If Misfits does end up beating Fnatic, Vitality, congratulations, I believe you make playoffs. But if not, they go into a tiebreaker situation with Excel, and that's going to be incredibly interesting. So what happened in this game? How did Vitality get here to this 0-3 disaster week? And how was Rogue able to finish them off? Well, overall, this Poppy was everywhere. Kind of an insane game from Malrang here. Probably the most deserving player of the game I've given in a while. I've never seen someone actively just be everywhere, quite like Malrang was on Poppy in this game. Really, it's a difficult proposition to flank every single player in the game at a different time, but Malrang did it. I mean, just the amount of times Poppy just shows up, slams you into a wall, and all of a sudden you're dead, it's like, oh my god, like what exactly am I supposed to do against this? This is actually unbelievable. So, yeah, Malrang with a great game here on the Poppy. Definitely one that he deserved to have. And one that he deserves to get credit for, I should say, more so. But the rest of Rogue also played well. Larson did well here on the Victor. I really like going back to some more control mage styles for him. I know they're not like the most meta things right now, but it's not like Victor's bad. He's just not ideal, right? And playing it into Ahri, you can still get ahead, and Larson did a good job of it. Like, this is Larson's playstyle. He wants to go back to these more control mage style picks, and I think if he wants to go to it, let him play it. Like, it's clearly what he's been best at all split long, so just let him roll with that. Comp and Trimby continue to be hyper-consistent, except for, you know, when they lost to BDS, but we won't talk about that. They continue to be hyper-consistent, and Ottawamne does a phenomenal job on the Ornn of mostly syncing up with Malrang and just creating some plays where it's like Poppy and Ornn stun lock you into oblivion, and all of a sudden you're dead. So, overall, great win for Rogue. If I like the draft a lot more here, and if they get picks like this in playoffs, honestly, I'd be very scared. As for Vitality, not a great game from them, quite frankly. Not a great game overall, not a great week, not a great split. I mean, honestly, towards the back half, I look like an idiot now for Vitality going 0-3 this week because I actually had them rated as my number 2 team last week after, I mean, to be fair, LEC standings, like, if someone's number 2 could be another person's number 6. Like, it really just is how the LEC has been so far, but the collapse that this team made in the Super Week here is actually extraordinary. Perkz is someone who I think has been having an MVP caliber season, and quite frankly, he was awful this week. There's really no other way to put it. He's going to get my dud of the game here. You very well could have given it to him for the game against Fnatic as well, where he just wasn't good at all either there. What a bad week from Perkz. I mean, this was somebody who I think was truly in the conversation to get MVP. He was the carry for Vitality all year long. He was the reason they were basically locked in the playoffs. All they had to do was win a single game this week, and they locked themselves in the playoffs, but they couldn't do it. And a lot of that is due to Perkz just not stepping up, not having a very good week. Obviously, we can talk about Carzzy as well. Carzzy is someone who also had a very bad week in general, but you know, you can talk about Carzzy mispositioning, you can talk about how Carzzy and Labrov make Zeri and Yuumi look balanced, but at the end of the day, like, Perkz was the carry for this team, and Carzzy and Labrov have been underperforming before, and usually Perkz, Alphari, Haru, they've been able to step up and carry it out of it, but they just weren't able to do that in this week at all against, yes, some good teams, but like, SK Gaming, like, in day one, like, you should be able to win that game, and you just weren't able to pull it off, so very disappointed with how Vitality's played. Perkz played bad, Carzzy and Labrov played really bad. Even if Alphari and Haru really weren't all that bad, their counterparts, their opponents in their lanes, were significantly better than them in this game in Ottawamne and Malrang, so that's a little bit of an indictment on them in general. Just not a good week for Vitality, and honestly, pretty much all of the confidence I had in this team was clearly misplaced, because in both Super Weeks now, they've gone 0-6, and that is disappointing. There's really no other way to put it. This team seems to fold under pressure, and that's just not what I would have expected from a team full of veterans like Perkz, like Carzzy, like Alphari, multiple people who have won titles in multiple regions, Haru, who's been to Worlds. Like, I don't know. I did not expect Vitality to completely crumble like this, but that is simply what has happened. So outlook-wise, Vitality is technically not out of the playoffs. Like I said, if Misfits is able to beat Fnatic, Vitality is actually in a much better spot. And even though they went 0-3 this week, they are still available for playoff contention. If Fnatic is able to win that game, they go into a tiebreaker with Excel, and they're going to have to win that game. As for Rogue, they put themselves at 11-7 here to finish off the regular season, kind of somewhere around 3rd or 4th, depending on what happens again in that Misfits Fnatic game. If Misfits is able to win, I believe it will proc a tiebreaker between them, and if they lose, obviously, Rogue just has the record advantage, and Misfits will fall in 4th. So Rogue has locked in, probably at best 3rd. At points, you were definitely looking at this team as a clear-cut number 1, but I think after how they played for a majority of the middle, I think they're going to be happy locking in 3rd, and honestly, this is a really good win to solidify the end of their season. Jumping into our final game of the LEC regular season summer split. Obviously, not the last game we'll get here today, because no spoilers, but we're getting to it right now. A pretty important one to decide a lot of team seeding here. We had Misfits Gaming taking on Fnatic, and Fnatic pick up a huge win here for their playoff chances, locking themselves in playoffs, and honestly giving them a shot to get really as high as the 4 seed, which is pretty absurd if they were to get to upper bracket after some of the weeks that they had, putting them in a tiebreaker scenario at the end of the day. But a good win here. I'll get into it pretty quickly. Fnatic with a great win overall, just off the back of Upset, again, who just really came out and, like, put on his carry pants here this week. He was awesome all week long for Fnatic. He's been good all year long for Fnatic. In a similar boat to, I think, a lot of AD carries, it is very rarely Upset's fault that this team loses, but when they win, it is very often Upset that helps them win. And so, big week from Upset and a big game from him here on the Zeri to completely take over, completely dominate everything that was happening in the game, play really well. Hylissang also had a very good week after what was, in my opinion, maybe the worst split of his career. He makes a very big bounce back here in week 8 to help push Fnatic back into playoff contention. And with this win, obviously, they lock it. Humanoid on the Ahri looked really good. One of his best games of the split, no question. Against a good opponent in VTO, Humanoid actively beat him. Like, actively was just better than him in this game. And that is a great sign for someone who has just been not good all year long, who's been dying early, who's been taken advantage of, his aggression's been taken advantage of, and has honestly not had the best macro sense on wave management and timings throughout the year either. It's good to see him bounce back a little bit here in the final game. Ahri with a really good macro performance, I think, overall, just beating his laner, but also translating that lead. Upset's going to get my player of the game. That shouldn't surprise all that many people. He was the guy for Fnatic. This entire comp was built around the Zeri. Wunder and Razork did their jobs as the frontline tanks. Hylissang helped on the Renata, a pick that can be very deadly in the right hands. And then Ahri was really, really important in this game. So overall, a really good win for Fnatic that they're going to be really happy to have gotten. As for Misfits, not the best loss, but it doesn't matter too much. It means you can't secure third place here. Your third place dreams are dead and gone, but you do still have a chance to get upper bracket. These two teams will actually play again later in the day to fight for fourth place, and that's going to be a fun matchup. What can Misfits take away that they did wrong in this one? Well, they gave up Zeri to Upset, which just is not something that you should be doing, and I don't think that's going to be a mistake they make twice here. Also, Zanzara just wasn't all that good on the Vi in this game. He looked okay at moments, but the Vi pick is really something you have to go all in on, and your team really has to commit with you. It didn't seem like Misfits was always on the same page with that pick, and I don't expect them to go back to that either in the later game. My dud of the game is going to go to Mursa, unfortunately, in the support position. I've actually been hyping up Mursa pretty much the entire split. I think he's been incredibly underrated as a support, and I think he definitely is in consideration for my all-pro votes. Not to say he'll definitely get one, but certainly in consideration, and unfortunately, he just wasn't able to show up today. Upset and Hylissang very much outplayed Neon and Mursa, and that was very apparent, in my opinion, in this game. When you pick Leona, especially with the Sivir, you have to make your engages count. And unfortunately for them, the Leona pick was just a little too feast or famine. The Sivir was never really able to get online in the same way that the Zeri was, and Upset was just able to take over the game. A lot of that due to some poor engages by Mursa. So unfortunately, he's going to get the dud of the game, but VTO on that same track, he's the carry for this team, and it's 2 games in a row now where he really hasn't been all that great. He wasn't all that great against G2 and Caps, and I get it. But he wasn't all that great against Humanoid here and Fnatic, so hopefully VTO can revind his form. Obviously, he is the guy on Misfits, like he is the superstar, and so if he's not playing at a superstar level, it's going to be more difficult for this team to win. He's basically dragged them, not to say everybody else on the team is bad, but I don't think they would be nearly a top 4 team without VTO on this team, and so if he's playing just average on a pick like Zoe like this, it's just not going to go all that well for Misfits. Overall, outlook-wise, it's fine. I treat this as like game 1 in a best of 1 or best of 5. Like, it happens. You know, Misfits they gave up the Zeri and they didn't get a ton in return. You get the Zoe Vi mid jungle, which just isn't all that cohesive. The Leona's just not a great pick. You can fix this. You have another chance to go back at it later in the day, but now both of you guys are sitting at 10 and 8, and so it's definitely going to be an interesting matchup to see what happens later. This does officially put Vitality and Excel in a tiebreaker as well, which is the one we'll be getting first. And that's going to be awesome. Fnatic have clinched their spot in the playoffs. They've got to be super duper stoked about that, considering how a lot of the season looked and how they were often on the outside looking in, I think, for a majority of that time. But this team is way too talented to not be a threat in the playoffs, and securing their spot here, I think, is just going to give them the confidence they need to go out and dominate in the playoffs and maybe surprise a lot of people. The 3-0 week here is officially complete for Fnatic. That would typically be the end of the Super Week there, as we've played 15 games, we've gotten through all 3 days, but we've actually got 2 tiebreakers to play through. One for the final playoff spot here, the 6th seed in playoffs, and one to determine who gets the 4 seed and who gets the 5 seed. 2 very important positions, as obviously making or not making the playoffs kind of hurts your chances to make Worlds a little bit, obviously. Obviously not making the playoffs means you can't make Worlds. And 4 and 5 is the difference between upper bracket and lower bracket. So 2 very important games to play here. We're going to kick it off with our 6 and 7 matchup here. The winner of this game makes playoffs. The loser is out. We've got Excel taking on Team Vitality. And the storyline is complete. Excel picks up the win. Vitality falls to 7th. The 0 and 4 Super Week. Vitality ends the year how they started it. Losing and not being able to pick up a single win in a Super Week. Oh my god, how is this even possible? They had a 4% chance statistically to miss Worlds. Or not even to miss Worlds, to miss playoffs, and they did it. They pulled it off. They pulled off the 4% chance. They were so cocky on Euphoria. Alphari was so confident that this weak schedule they had towards the end of the year was going to lock them in Worlds, and look where they are now, sitting at home, watching from their own computer screens. An unbelievable turn of events here from Vitality. But let's talk about Excel. They played this game great. Both teams drafted pretty balls to the wall comps, and it was a lot of fun. Both put everything on the table. We got the Twisted Fate out of Nukeduck and the Draven Thresh in the bottom lane for Excel. Vitality, on the other hand, with a comp that is incredibly dangerous if you're actually able to pull it off. Orianna Ball on a Kennen or a Wukong can be terrifying for the enemy team, and I'm really glad both teams decided to put it all out here today, but Excel was the better team, mostly, again, based on their bottom lane. And this is really what I've been talking about with Excel. If this bot lane can really get together and be phenomenal, this team is really hard to beat and really scary to have to go into, because Patrick and Mickey as a mechanical duo is maybe one of the best in the world. They really are. They just have not been able to piece it together for a considerable amount of time over the course of the season. But over the course of the Super Week, they've gone 3-0 over the last 3 games, day 2 to the tiebreaker. And all 3 games have really been decided by either Patrick or Mickey. Mickey is going to get my player of the game here on the Thresh. Something we're really not seeing all that much because they nerfed Thresh into the ground so much that the pick honestly just isn't all that worth it anymore outside of Lantern. But when you're that good at a champion, play him. I always say it. It doesn't really matter if you are out of the meta with a pick. If you are better playing it than the enemy is playing against it, it is probably still worth picking. And that is true for Mickey X on Thresh here, who had a phenomenal game. He's going to get my player of the game. He was great, creating so much for Patrick, creating so much for Finn in the late game. It's just a phenomenal game overall for Mickey, and what a turnaround in the final week to push Excel into playoffs. Then you also have Patrick on the Draven. Obviously, I talk about this Draven pick a lot. If it gets going, it is impossible to stop that snowball, and Patrick very much did get going in this game, and those two were really able to dominate a lot of what was happening. Finn did a great job in the top lane on the Gwen, really just beat Alphari in lane, which is not something that you would expect me to say with Finn struggling recently, Alphari kind of being the lane god. Finn really outclassed him here today, and it was a big reason why Excel was able to pick up the win. Nukeduck and Marcoon both did their jobs, obviously, as more supportive role members, but everybody on the team held their own here. Excel with a great win. As for Vitality, they've got to be completely and utterly blindsided by this week. 0-4 to knock yourself out of playoffs is inconceivable for a team that felt all but locked, and a team with an MVP candidate, but that MVP candidate just did not show up this week. Perks gets my dud of the game. He was bad here on the Orianna, a pick that is generally very weak. I get it. I just said it. If you want to pick Comfort, play it better, but you have to play it right. Like, if it doesn't work out, you're going to look like a fool. And that's what happened to Perks this week. He pulls out the Orianna, and it just doesn't work out. He gets my dud of the game in the crucial tiebreaker, and he wasn't good at all in Week 8. He was a big reason why Vitality is sitting here outside of the playoffs, and it's really sad to say, because honestly, he was so ridiculously good for a majority of the year. So much so to the point of, like, I've been saying on this channel that, like, I really think if Perks had just had an average week, like a not bad week, he would have been my MVP. If Vitality was a top 3-ish team, even top 4 team going into playoffs, Perks would have been my MVP. He would have been the most important player to his team in the LEC this split. But this week so catastrophically ruined his reputation that I just don't even think he could be in the conversation. And that's really sad to say. Obviously, Carzzy and Labrov were also giga bad this week, but they've been bad all season long. That's really a reason why Vitality was never truly considered a title contender, is because this bot lane has been super bad and super inconsistent for a long period of time. They're going to have to look back on this and say, like, I don't even know if they can bring these two into the season next year and expect anything different to happen. Then Alphari and Haru, at least Haru showed up and tried to play on the Wukong. Alphari did nothing on the Kennen, a classic Alphari game of he's fine in lane and then gets out of lane and it doesn't matter. He's not really able to make an impact. And Vitality's out. That's it. The season's over. So yeah, there's really no outlook for them. Their season's over, and I expect changes to be made. This has to be the most heartbreaking thing that could have possibly happened to them, but hopefully this kicks their ass into gear. They were way too confident heading into the final week, and they got reality checked, and hopefully that helps all of these players next year. This is going to be the first year officially now that we don't have perks at Worlds ever since he started playing on G2. That's a disappointment, but at the end of the day, they have no one to blame but themselves, and they're going to be sitting out. As for Excel, they've given themselves the opportunity to run the gambit now. They're going to have to run through losers bracket, which is always a tough predicament to put yourselves in, but the dream is not over yet. You really, with the way that Worlds qualification happens here, you really only have to win 2 best-of-5s in order to make Worlds, and so the dream is certainly not dead for anybody in the playoffs right now, including Excel, and this win and this week in general should give them the confidence that they need to go in and play their best game come playoff time. That's going to bring us to our second tiebreaker and our official final game before playoffs here in Summer Split 2022 LEC, all the shebang. This video's gone on quite a while, so let's go ahead and jump into our final game, the battle for 4th place between Fnatic and Misfits Gaming. And Misfits win a huge game here, a big win for Misfits to avenge the loss they had earlier in the day against Fnatic. Vitality's probably feeling pretty hard done right now. Oh, Misfits couldn't win the one earlier, but they had to win this one, huh? But they played really well in this game. Honestly, they go to Reddit's advice, and they get rid of the Zeri. They get Zeri, you know, off of Upset off of Zeri, one of those two. And, honestly, Fnatic's game plan kind of crumbles around that. No longer can they just sit there and wait until late game in order to be strong. You take away Azir and LeBlanc from Humanoid, and he's really susceptible to early game problems, even when he's on a macro pick like Taliyah. Honestly, especially when he's on a macro pick like Taliyah. And Misfits can take advantage of all of that. This was kind of a stomp. Pretty much everybody on Misfits played really well in this game. There was a lot, and I mean a lot of attention directed topside by Fnatic. Razork and Wonder were really doing up to try and take advantage of this Gnar pick and to try and get a lot top lane. Irrelevant was camped into absolute oblivion. But he did not tilt. He did not give up. He got camped, and then later in the game, he made some huge plays on Gnar in team fights. Almost so much so that I almost gave him player of the game just for how good he was in the back half and how tilt-proof he actually seemed to be in this game. But you have to give it, in my opinion, to either Zanzara, VTO, or Mursa, because those three were all so phenomenal in this game. Zanzara took over the entire map on Poppy, was creating a huge numerical advantage pretty much wherever he was because so much attention was being directed topside that they could take advantage of Humanoid in the mid lane. They could take advantage of Upset in the bottom lane. And they did a really good job of that. And then VTO, because he was the focal point. He was the carry on the Sylas here. He was doing all of the damage. He was basically unkillable by the end game. Really just doing Sylas things, right? And then you also have Mursa, who did so much all throughout the game. For me, Mursa's going to get the player of the game. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, how can you give the player of the game to someone who played Yuumi? But, like, you can play Yuumi at a high level. And Mursa for sure played Yuumi at a high level here. The amount of damage he mitigated for Neon throughout the laning phase probably was enough in order for him to win by himself. But not only that, the amount of healing that he does over the course of the game is incredible. VTO is literally unkillable with Mursa here. And not only that, but Neon is allowed to do so much. The Pyke pick was essentially completely irrelevant as long as Mursa was in the fight, and that for me is why Mursa's going to get player of the game. But like I said, you can give it to Zanzara, you can give it to VTO. I think both also were incredibly important to what happened in this game. Hell, you could probably give it to Irrelevant just for how he played towards the back half of this game on the Gnar, and for the fact that he got a victory after being camped so hard in the top lane. But overall, just a great game for Misfits. Unfortunately, Fnatic was on the other end of that. This looked much more like the Fnatic that we saw before Week 8 and not in Week 8, because this was a team that was really rolling and firing on all cylinders over the past 3 games, going 3-0 this week, but this was a little bit of a Debbie Downer. Humanoid's going to get my dud of the game here. They spent a lot of attention topside. Fnatic did, Razork did specifically, and that meant that unfortunately Humanoid didn't have a lot of backup, and it's not like Humanoid's ever just going to play safe, so he got taken advantage of quite a bit. VTO was significantly better than him in this game. A good bounce back from VTO after a couple of rough games in a row in Week 8. And Humanoid was just not able to keep up with it. The macro sense for Taliyah is important, but you have to get there. And unfortunately, Humanoid was so far behind by the mid game, it just did not matter. He was completely out of it. Neon and Mursa, like I said, also did a great job of actually laning against the Ezreal Pyke, which can be a pretty scary lane to lane into because Ezreal does so much poke damage that you can get into a situation where one Pyke Q into ultimate is a kill. And so It is, pretty scary in that respect, but Mersun did such a great job of blocking pretty much every Ezreal Q, jumping right back on Neon, so he's at full health, not really putting anybody in any danger, which was super duper solid from both of them. Honestly, I thought Neon and Mursa played great. Unfortunately, Upset and Hill is saying we're just on the recipient of that. With Mursa playing quite like that, I'm not sure there was a ton that Upset or Hilly could possibly do to salvage that laning phase, and it's not like they scaled nearly as hard as a Felios Yuumi into a Sylas and stuff like that. Like I said, Wonder and Razork did play kind of okay, because they did try to dominate the top lane, but unfortunately for Wonder and Razork, Irrelevant was still very relevant towards the back half of the game on the Gnar, and them trying to take him out of the game and try to get an advantage here on Razork was just probably not the call, because at best the gold's going on Trundle, at worst it's going on Ornn, and even in the best case scenario there, I would still much rather have the gold on Ezreal or on Pyke in that situation. I just don't understand why you don't focus more on this bot lane, but it is what it is. They had their game plan and it didn't work out, and now they're sitting in 5th place. So Fnatic's going to have to go through losers bracket. They're going to have to beat up Excel and then win one other series here in order to qualify for Worlds. It is very much still possible and within the reach for them. Obviously, this is a good Fnatic team, and they should be able to win 2 series, 2 best-of-5s, but they don't have the safety net of being able to lose one. They have to do them both in a row, and so it's definitely going to be interesting to watch. As for Misfits, they make their way to upper bracket. They're going to have to take on G2 in the first round, which is a very tough matchup overall for Misfits. I actually think it might be their worst matchup, unfortunately. But, outside of that, they're a very good team. They're going to be happy to be in upper bracket. And they do get a chance to still, they really only have to win 1 best-of-5 to make Worlds, which is it's very possible for them. And so it's definitely going to be an interesting run from both of these teams, but Misfits definitely, in my opinion, had Fnatic's number in this game. It's all about, can they continue that, and can Fnatic adapt now that we've seen basically 2 games in the best-of-5 out of these 2. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 8 LEC overview and analysis of all 17 games that were played this week. Very grueling to go over these super weeks, but hopefully you guys enjoyed the long-form content of these videos. Obviously, we've already been in the midst of our playoff coverage. I talked about that a bit at the beginning, but if you haven't checked out the LCK and the LPL videos, even the LCS primer that went up yesterday, I highly recommend you go check that out. Up on the screen, though, right now, you're going to see the LEC standings, and they're going to be updated for playoffs. We now know everybody's seed in the playoffs. Top 6 make it. 1 plays 4, 2 plays 3 in uppers bracket, 5 plays 6 in losers bracket, and then we get some shenanigans. G2, by virtue of being the number 1 seed, has already qualified for the World Championships, and this actually opens up some interesting possibilities for other teams. Most teams really only need 1 best-of-5 win in order to make the World Championships, but Fnatic and Excel would probably need 2 in order for the dream to come true. It is still possible, obviously, for everyone involved, but we've definitely got some interesting matchups that we're going to detail in depth later this week in my LEC playoff primer. Hope you guys are excited for that. There are no power rankings up on the screen right now because we will be talking about all of my predictions and how I feel about all of these teams in the playoff primer for the LEC in just a few days. So stick around, hit the subscribe button if you want to watch that video. Obviously, it's going to be some great content. My player of the week and my dud of the week. I got to get to this. It's the final week of the season. Who showed up, who didn't? My player of the week in week 8 for the LEC is going to go to Upset on Fnatic. A great week for Fnatic. Tiebreaker notwithstanding, I'm not really counting it, even though he didn't play all that bad. I mean, he wasn't great in the tiebreaker, I should say, but he was so instrumental in Fnatic pushing up to the number 5 seed here that it really felt like an obvious choice to anoint him as the player of the week. Another choice I think would have pretty obviously been Yankos. I think those were the 2 that I could have debated between, but I think Upset's wins had maybe a little bit more pressure to them because without them, maybe they don't even make playoffs. So definitely it's going to go to Upset here in week 8. My dud of the week in week 8 is going to go to Carzzy on Vitality. It really couldn't go to anybody else. He played like absolute garbage this week. He played like absolute garbage for a majority of the year. It could have gone to Perks as well on the same team. But overall, I felt like Carzzy was definitely more of a detriment, I think, to his team. Perks just maybe had a little bit of a bigger narrative because he was the one that was supposed to be bringing them out of the dumpster, and unfortunately, he was the one who led them right into it this week. So for me, it is going to go to Carzzy, although definitely Perks was considered. Pretty much everybody on Astralis was also considered, especially the bottom lane, Kabe and Jonghoon especially. But yeah, that's going to do it. That's my weekly recap series for the LEC done, dusted, in the books. If you guys enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like. I've put so much effort into this series all year long that it really would mean a lot to me if you guys left a like to show your support. I really put a lot of time and effort into this. Obviously, we all do, and I really hope you guys get as much out of this as I do. So if you did enjoy it, please go ahead and leave a like, and let me know down in the comment section below how you felt about the final week of the season, how you feel about the playoffs starting soon, what teams you think are overrated, what teams do you think are underrated. We're going to be doing a big deep dive on all of them soon, so I hope you guys are excited for that. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.